Hello! Today we will solve a question from the TOEFL Reading section, focusing on the Read an Academic Passage question type. We will practice identifying the main idea, tracking key details, understanding cause-effect relationships, and noticing repeated concepts, so we can choose the most accurate answer based strictly on the passage. Ready to dive into the history of photography? Let's get started and break down this passage together to master these essential skills. If you're finding this lesson helpful, be sure to subscribe to my TOEFL for more tips and practice to help you ace your exam. The Development of Early Photography. This title tells us exactly what the passage will be about. The key word, development, suggests a process of growth or change over time. It signals that we won't be looking at just one moment, but a series of events. The second key phrase, early photography, tells us the specific topic. So, we can expect the passage to explain how photography started and evolved in its beginning stages. It's like a mini history lesson. The invention of photography in the early 19th century was not the work of a single individual, but the culmination of efforts by numerous inventors. This first sentence is super important because it sets up the main idea right away. It tells us that photography was not the work of a single individual. Instead, it was the culmination of efforts, which means it was the final result of many people's work. The phrase, numerous inventors, reinforces this. So, right from the start, we know this story involves multiple people and a long process. For decades, scientists and artists had sought a reliable method for chemically capturing the images produced by a camera obscura. This sentence gives us the backstory. For a long time, or for decades, people were trying to find a reliable method. This shows the problem they were trying to solve: how to permanently capture images. The goal was chemically capturing the images, which tells us this was a scientific challenge. The challenge was to find a light-sensitive material that could not only record an image, but also make it permanent. Here, the passage gets more specific about the problem. There were two parts to the challenge. First, they needed a light-sensitive material to record an image. Second, and just as important, they had to make it permanent. This detail is crucial because it highlights the technical hurdles that inventors had to overcome. Early breakthroughs by figures like Nicephore Niepce in the 1820s produced the first rudimentary photographs, though they required extremely long exposure times. This sentence introduces one of the first successes. We learn about early breakthroughs and get a specific name, Nicephore Niepce. The photos were rudimentary, meaning very basic or simple. And here's a key limitation: they required extremely long exposure times. This shows us that while progress was being made, the process was still not very practical. A major advancement came in 1839 with the public announcement of the daguerreotype process, developed by Louis Daguerre in France. Now we move to the next big step. The key phrase here is major advancement. This tells us the daguerreotype process was a significant improvement. We also get the inventor, Louis Daguerre, and the year, 1839. This marks a key moment in the timeline of photography's development. This technique produced a highly detailed, one-of-a-kind image on a polished, silver-plated sheet of copper. This sentence describes the daguerreotype. Two features stand out. First, the images were highly detailed, which suggests a high quality. Second, they were one-of-a-kind. This is a very important detail that hints at a limitation we'll learn about soon. It means each photo was unique and couldn't be copied. The daguerreotype was an instant success, and portrait studios soon appeared in cities across Europe and the United States. This tells us about the impact of the invention. It was an instant success, which means it became popular very quickly. The result? Portrait studios soon appeared, showing that it had a commercial application. Notice it was popular in Europe and the United States, not just one place. However, the process had significant limitations. The images were fragile, difficult to view from certain angles, and could not be reproduced. The word, however, is a big clue. It signals a contrast. Despite its success, there were significant limitations. The most critical one for the story is that the images could not be reproduced. This is a major drawback and sets the stage for the next invention. Each photograph was a unique object. This short sentence is powerful. It repeats and emphasizes the key limitation from the previous sentence. By saying each one was a unique object, it makes it very clear that you couldn't make copies. This is the main problem that the next part of the passage will solve. The next crucial step in photography's evolution was the calotype process, invented by William Henry Fox Talbot. This sentence introduces the third major development. The phrase, "next crucial step," tells us we are continuing the story of progress. We are now learning about the calotype process, and we get another inventor's name, William Henry Fox Talbot. The word evolution is important because it ties back to the main theme of development. Unlike the daguerreotype, the calotype produced a paper negative from which multiple positive prints could be made. This is the key comparison sentence. The phrase, "unlike the daguerreotype," directly contrasts the two processes. What was the big difference? The calotype used a paper negative. And what did that allow? Multiple positive prints could be made. This directly solves the main limitation of the daguerreotype we just read about. While the image quality was initially softer than that of a daguerreotype, the ability to create copies was a revolutionary advantage. This sentence explains the trade-offs. The word "while" shows a contrast. The calotype's image quality was softer, meaning less sharp than a daguerreotype. But the ability to create copies was a revolutionary advantage. This tells us that even though the pictures weren't as detailed, being able to reproduce them was a huge deal. This development the era of reproducible photography, making images more accessible and affordable, and paving the way for the medium's future as a tool for mass communication. This final sentence summarizes the massive impact of the calotype. This invention inaugurated, or started, the era of reproducible photography. Because of this, images became more accessible and affordable. This connects photography to mass communication, showing its importance for the future. It's the perfect conclusion to the story of early development. All right, we've carefully read and analyzed the passage. Now let's tackle our first question. This one asks us to find the main idea of the entire passage. Which of the following best states the main idea of the passage? This is a classic TOEFL question. It's asking for the main idea, which is the central point or overall message of the text. We need to find the option that summarizes the entire passage, not just one part of it. A good main idea will cover the journey from the early challenges to the daguerreotype and finally to the calotype, showing a progression. Remember, the first sentence told us photography was the work of numerous inventors, and the passage showed a series of advancements and crucial steps. This is our big clue. Let's evaluate option A together. The daguerreotype was the most important process in photography's history. This option focuses only on the daguerreotype. While the passage calls it a major advancement, it also calls the calotype's advantage revolutionary. The passage presents a sequence of developments, not a judgment on which one was most important. This option is too narrow because it ignores the contributions of Niepce and, more significantly, the calotype, which solved a major problem. Incorrect. Now that we've reviewed the example, let's check option B and see if it matches. Photography was invented by a single person, Louis Daguerre. This option directly contradicts the very first sentence of the passage. Remember, it clearly states the invention of photography was not the work of a single individual, but the effort of numerous inventors. This is a factual error based on the text. Incorrect. Let's move on to option C. The evolution of early photography involved key technological advancements. This option seems very strong. The word evolution perfectly matches the idea of development over time, a word used in the passage itself. The phrase key technological advancements accurately describes the progression from early experiments to the daguerreotype and then the calotype. This statement covers the entire scope of the passage without focusing too much on one detail. Correct. Here's option D. Let's break it down. Photography studios were only popular in Europe. This option makes a claim using the word only. We need to be careful with extreme words like this. The passage states that portrait studios appeared in cities across Europe and the United States. This option incorrectly limits the popularity to just Europe, which is a factual error. Incorrect. The correct answer is C, because the key expressions in the text directly match this option, while the other choices either provide incomplete information or clearly contradict the passage. Great job on the first question. Now let's move on to the second one. This is a vocabulary question, where we need to find the meaning of a word from the context of the passage. The word inaugurated in the passage is closest in meaning to. For this type of question, we need to look at the word inaugurated and understand how it's used in the sentence. The sentence is, "This development inaugurated the era of reproducible photography." We need to figure out what the calotype process did to the era of reproducible photography. It was a new development that led to this era, so it must have started it or kicked it off. Let's look for a word that means to start. Let's take a closer look at option A, delayed. This means to make something late or slow it down. The passage says the calotype was a revolutionary advantage that paved the way for the future. This is the opposite of delaying something. It sped things up. So this option doesn't fit the context at all. Incorrect. Let's move on to option B, finished. This means to end something. The calotype process didn't end the era of reproducible photography. It was the very beginning of it. The context is about a new era starting, not an old one finishing. Incorrect. Next, we'll examine option C, questioned. This means to doubt or ask about something. The development of the calotype didn't cause people to doubt reproducible photography. It made it possible. The tone of the passage is positive, calling it an advantage. This word has the wrong meaning for the context. Incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. Began. This means to start. If we replace inaugurated with began, the sentence reads, "This development began the era of reproducible photography." This fits the context perfectly. The calotype was the start of a new age in photography where copies could be made. Correct. The correct choice should be marked as D because the context of the passage supports only this option. The other choices involve surface-level reading or misinterpretation. Excellent work! Let's proceed to the third question. This one is an inference question, which means the answer isn't stated directly. We have to use the clues in the text to draw a logical conclusion. What can be inferred about daguerreotypes compared to calotypes? The question asks us to infer or figure out something that is strongly suggested but not explicitly written. We need to compare daguerreotypes and calotypes based on the information in paragraphs 2 and 3. The key is to find a direct comparison in the text. I remember a sentence in paragraph 3 that directly compared their image quality. Let's focus on that. Let's take a closer look at option A. Daguerreotypes were easier and cheaper to produce. Let's check the text. The passage says the calotype process made images more accessible and affordable. This implies that the previous process, the daguerreotype, was likely more difficult and expensive. So this option is the opposite of what we can infer. Incorrect. Next, we'll examine option B. Daguerreotypes offered sharper image detail. This looks promising. Let's find the evidence. Paragraph 3 says, while the image quality of a calotype was initially softer than that of a daguerreotype, if the calotype was softer, it logically means the daguerreotype was sharper or had more detail. This is a perfect example of a correct inference. Correct. Let's move on to option C. Daguerreotypes were more popular among amateur photographers. The passage mentions portrait studios for daguerreotypes, which suggests professional use. It never mentions amateur photographers at all. We cannot infer anything about amateurs, so this option is unsupported by the text. Incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. Daguerreotypes were designed for mass distribution. This is the exact opposite of what the passage states. It says daguerreotypes could not be reproduced, and that each one was a unique object. Mass distribution requires making many copies, which was impossible with this process. Incorrect. Here, the correct option is B, which shows that once we understand the main idea of the text, identifying the correct answer becomes much more straightforward. Fantastic! We're making great progress. Let's move on to question number 4. This is a detail question, asking for a specific piece of information mentioned in the passage. What was a major limitation of the daguerreotype process? This question is very direct. It asks for a major limitation of the daguerreotype. The passage has a sentence that starts with, however, and explicitly lists the drawbacks. Let's go back to paragraph 2 and find that exact information. The answer should be right there in the text. Let's take a closer look at option A. It required very short exposure times. The passage mentions extremely long exposure times in reference to the very first rudimentary photographs by Niepce, not the daguerreotype. Also, a short exposure time would be an advantage, not a limitation. This is incorrect. Next, we'll examine option B. The images could not be easily copied. Let's check paragraph 2. The passage clearly states as one of the significant limitations that the images could not be reproduced. This is a direct match with the option. It's exactly what the text says. Correct. Let's move on to option C. The materials used were widely available. First, being widely available would be a strength, not a limitation. Second, the passage doesn't say anything at all about whether the materials, like silver-plated copper sheets, were widely available or not. The text doesn't support this. Incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. It produced images with very little detail. This is the opposite of what the passage says. It describes the daguerreotype as producing a highly detailed image. High detail was one of its major strengths, not a limitation. Incorrect. The correct answer is B, since this option alone fully and clearly addresses what the question is asking, highlighting the importance of careful reading. Okay, on to our final question. This one asks about the relationship between two paragraphs. We need to think about how the author organized the information and what purpose each paragraph serves. How does paragraph 3 relate to paragraph 2? This question asks us to understand the structure of the text. We need to see how the idea in paragraph 3 connects to the idea in paragraph 2. Let's recap. Paragraph 2 introduced the daguerreotype and its success, but ended with its significant limitations, especially that it couldn't be copied. Paragraph 3 introduced the calotype, which, unlike the daguerreotype, could produce multiple positive prints. It seems like paragraph 3 presents a solution to a problem from paragraph 2. Let's evaluate option A together. It describes an alternative process that overcame a key limitation mentioned in paragraph 2. This seems perfect. The calotype is an alternative process. The key limitation in paragraph 2 was that images could not be reproduced. Paragraph 3 describes how the calotype overcame this by allowing for multiple positive prints. This option accurately describes the problem-solution relationship between the two paragraphs. Correct. Now that we've reviewed the example, let's check option B and see if it matches. It provides more detail about the chemical process of the daguerreotype. This is incorrect. Paragraph 3 is not about the daguerreotype, it is about the calotype process. It introduces a completely new process. It doesn't add more details to the previous one. Incorrect. Let's move on to option C. It challenges the claim that the daguerreotype was successful. This is also incorrect. Paragraph 3 doesn't challenge the daguerreotype's success. In fact, paragraph 2 clearly states it was an instant success. Paragraph 3 simply presents the next crucial step in the evolution of photography, building upon what came before, not arguing with it. Incorrect. Here's option D. Let's break it down. It explains the origins of the inventors mentioned in paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 mentions Louis Daguerre from France. Paragraph 3 mentions William Henry Fox Talbot, but tells us nothing about his origins. It certainly does not explain the origins of Daguerre. This option is not what paragraph 3 does. Incorrect. The correct answer to this question is A, since this option alone fully and clearly addresses what the question is asking, highlighting the importance of careful reading.